Hello, my name is Daniel Ruiz, and this is the story of the night my family took away my seat, and how I made sure they'd never sit at it the same way again. It was Christmas Eve, the one night of the year that always felt like home to me, no matter how hard life had been. For 25 years, my seat at the head of the table wasn't just a spot, it was a place of honor. I carved the turkey, poured the wine, and told the old family stories my late wife loved to hear. But that night, my chair wasn't there. I walked into my son's dining room carrying a bottle of red wine, ready to play my role as I always had. The laughter hit me first, warm but without my name in it. My daughter-in-law floated around like a hostess in a magazine spread, arranging plates and brushing shoulders with her guests. My grandkids ran past me without more than a distracted, "Hi, Grandpa!" And then I saw it. My chair, the one I'd sat in since before my son was even born, was now at the far end of the table, occupied by her father, the man she married into the family. He was leaning back, comfortable, telling some story about his golf game as if he'd been there for decades. My plate was gone, my name card was gone, and not one person looked surprised. I hesitated, standing there with the wine in my hand, like an unwanted guest who'd walked into the wrong house. My son finally noticed me, offering a quick smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, we're trying something new this year. Hope you don't mind." Trying something new. I nodded, pretending it didn't feel like a blade between my ribs. I sat in a random empty chair at the corner of the table, far from where I used to lead the conversation. And as the night went on, I realized I wasn't part of this family anymore. I was background noise. I didn't just lose my seat. I lost my place in the family, and they were about to regret it. Before everything changed, our family table was the heart of our lives. When my wife, Elena, was alive, she and I turned every holiday, every Sunday dinner, into something special. She'd be in the kitchen, humming to herself, while I carved the roast or stirred her famous gravy. The smell of garlic, rosemary, and fresh bread would fill the house, and no one needed an invitation. My kids knew that seat at the table was theirs. Back then, my role was simple. I was the anchor. I hosted every gathering, paid for every meal, and made sure no one left hungry or empty-handed. If my son needed help with his mortgage, I was there. When my daughter's car broke down, I wrote the check without hesitation. Birthdays, graduations, weddings. I didn't just attend them. I built them. I kept traditions alive because that's what Elena would have wanted. I still remember our last Christmas together before she passed. She whispered to me, "Promise me you'll keep the family together, no matter what." I promised, and for years after, I tried. But slowly, things shifted. It started small. My daughter-in-law insisting she host more often. At first, I thought it was thoughtful, a way to take the pressure off me. But at her dinners, my seat wasn't at the head of the table anymore. Sometimes it wasn't even next to my kids. I'd find myself at the far end, next to acquaintances I barely knew. Conversations began to happen without me. Plans were made in group chats I wasn't part of. Photos from family events showed up online, smiling faces, arms around each other, with me mysteriously absent. I told myself I was imagining it, that families change, and that's okay. But deep down, I felt something I'd never felt before in my own home, like a guest, like I was being replaced. I held on to Elena's promise, believing I could fix whatever was breaking, but I didn't know it yet. The real break hadn't happened. The moment that would shatter everything was still coming. It all started the year my son married Isabella. She was polite at first, warm even. The kind of person who knew exactly what to say to make a good first impression. But soon after the honeymoon, her family began to appear more and more at our gatherings. The first time I met them, I could see the difference right away. The Martinez family carried themselves like they were used to being in charge. They dressed sharper, spoke louder, and made sure everyone knew about their latest trip to Europe or the new property they'd bought. They weren't unkind, but there was an air of quiet judgment in the way they glanced at me, at my modest home, at the worn edges of my dining table. Before I knew it, the traditions Elena and I had built for decades were slowly replaced. The Christmas Eve roast I used to prepare, now it was catered by one of their preferred chefs. The Sunday dinners where my grandkids would fight over who got to sit next to Grandpa, now they were brunches at a country club where I didn't quite fit in. And the strangest thing was how my role began to shrink. At first, it was little things. I'd be asked to bring just the dessert instead of the main dish. My seat at the head of the table shifted to the side, then further down. Conversations would flow around me, but never toward me. The Martinez family had a way of filling the room, their jokes, their plans, their loud, confident voices. And my son, Michael, seemed to melt right into their world. He laughed at their stories, joined their golf outings, and started talking about new traditions, as if the old ones had never mattered. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep inside, I knew I was becoming a guest in what used to be my own family. My place, once secure, once built with love and sacrifice, was being quietly taken over. And the worst part? Nobody seemed to notice. Or maybe they just didn't care. It didn't happen overnight. That's what made it harder to see and harder to fight. At first, it was just the little things. A joke at the table that made everyone laugh except me. I'd smile politely, waiting for someone to explain, but the conversation would roll on without me. Later, I'd hear the same joke retold and realize it came from a group chat I wasn't part of. Then came the accidental oversights. A Sunday lunch where I found out only afterward that the whole family had gathered at Isabella's parents' lake house. An anniversary dinner where my invitation was lost in the shuffle. Michael would always have an excuse ready. "Oh, Dad, it was last minute. You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway." But the moment that hit me like a cold wind was Thanksgiving. For as long as I could remember, I'd carved the turkey. It was my small piece of tradition, something Elena had always insisted on, even when my hands shook a little more each year. That first slice was a kind of blessing over the meal, over the family. That year, I stood in the kitchen doorway, ready to pick up the carving knife, only to see Isabella's father already doing it. The knife glinted under the bright lights, the meat arranged on a platter while everyone clapped at his perfect slices. No one looked my way. No one noticed I was still standing there, empty-handed. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. My place had been taken, not just at the head of the table, but in the quiet rituals that made me part of the family. I sat down that night and felt invisible. I spoke, but my words floated into the air and vanished, unheard. It's a strange kind of pain, being present yet absent at the same time. Not because you've left, but because you've been quietly replaced. I didn't say anything that night, but as I watched the laughter pass over me like I wasn't even there, I knew one thing. The person they thought they could erase was about to leave a mark they'd never forget. When I stepped into the dining room that night, my eyes went straight to the head of the table, my seat, except it wasn't mine anymore. Sitting there, comfortably leaning back like he'd been doing it for years, was Robert, Isabella's father. My fork and knife spot, the one I'd occupied for every holiday since the day Michael was born, now held his wine glass, his plate, his smile. Michael glanced up, gave me the kind of half-smile you'd give a neighbor you barely knew, and then looked away. No gesture to switch seats, no apology. Just nothing. And then Isabella, with her perfectly measured laugh, looked at Robert and said, "See? I told you, new traditions feel fresh." Her words hung in the air like smoke. For a second, I thought maybe someone would catch the sting in my eyes, maybe offer an explanation. Instead, conversation picked back up around me like nothing had happened. I took an empty seat along the side, 2 places down from the corner. From there, I could see the entire table. Robert carving the roast like he'd been doing it for decades. Isabella beaming as if she'd won a prize. Michael nodding along to his father-in-law's story while barely looking in my direction. I barely touched my food. My ears caught every laugh, every inside reference I didn't understand. My plate sat there cooling, while my coffee cup filled with the bitter taste of realization. It wasn't about a chair. It wasn't about Robert. It was about what that empty spot meant. That I wasn't the head of this family anymore. I wasn't even in the frame. I kept my face neutral, the way you do when you're bleeding inside but don't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing it. But in my mind, I wasn't listening to the stories or the jokes. I was counting the years, counting the dinners, counting the dollars, counting every single thing I had given and every way they'd replaced me. By the time dessert was served, I wasn't just an invisible man at my own family's table. I was a man taking mental inventory, and the more I counted, the more I knew. They had taken something from me that night, and I was going to take something back. That night, long after the laughter from the dinner table had faded from my ears, I sat at my kitchen table with nothing but a yellow legal pad and a pen. I started writing, At first, it was just a few big things that came to mind. The down payment on Michael and Isabella's house, $42,000 from the equity I pulled from my own, the $18,000 in student loans I paid off so Michael could start fresh in his marriage, the $12,500 for Isabella's emergency surgery when her insurance didn't cover it. But then the memories started piling up faster than I could keep up with the ink. The $5,000 I lent them when Michael's car broke down, never paid back. The mortgage payments I quietly covered when his hours got cut. The vacations they went on while I babysat my grandkids for free. The Christmases where I bought every gift under the tree because they were tight that year. Page after page, the list grew. Each line a reminder that my love had been measured out in dollars, favors, and sacrifices. By the third page, my pen slowed. I sat back and stared at the numbers, the total creeping higher in my head as I added them up. Over $250,000, give or take, more than I'd ever spent on myself in my entire life. And for what? So they could carve me out of my own family traditions? So I could sit 2 seats down from the head of my own table while a man who had never lifted a finger for them basked in the role I'd built? A knot formed in my chest, not from anger alone, but from the realization that I had funded the very people who erased me. Every check I'd written, every bill I'd paid, every sacrifice I'd made had been another brick in the pedestal they'd used to elevate someone else in my place. I closed the notepad, slid it into the drawer, and poured myself a drink. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was about balance, and I was done giving. I didn't slam my fist on the table that night. I didn't call them screaming or write a furious email I'd regret later. No, I poured another glass of whiskey, sat back in my chair, and let the anger settle into something far more dangerous: clarity. This wasn't going to be some petty outburst they could dismiss as Dad overreacting. No, this was going to be deliberate, controlled, the kind of truth that would leave no room for denial. I thought about every conversation I'd had with my late wife, Maria, about dignity. She used to say, "Daniel, sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stand tall and let the facts speak for you." That's exactly what I was going to do. They wanted me invisible? Fine. But they were going to feel the weight of my absence. Not just at the dinner table, but in every corner of their lives where my hand had quietly been holding them up. I took out the yellow legal pad again, flipping through the pages of financial proof I'd written down earlier. Numbers, dates, receipts, every single thing that tied their comfort to my sacrifice. It wasn't just money, it was my time, my labor, my years, and I realized something. I didn't need to yell to make a point. All I had to do was hold up a mirror. Let them see what life looked like without me holding it together. The opportunity came to me almost too easily. The annual spring family barbecue. The one event where everyone showed up. Cousins, neighbors, church friends, people whose opinions my children desperately cared about. The perfect stage. I could already picture it. I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't accuse. I'd simply present the truth, calmly, factually, and let the silence do the rest. They'd have no clever comebacks, no way to spin it. By the time the night ended, they would understand exactly whose seat they'd taken and what it would cost them. They thought they'd erased me, but the next time they saw me, I'd be standing, and I'd be holding the entire table in my hands. Once the plan was clear in my mind, I knew I couldn't walk into that barbecue empty-handed. This wasn't going to be about opinions or he said, she said. I needed hard, undeniable proof. So I started digging. I went through my old filing cabinet, the one in the corner of my study that still smelled faintly of Maria's lavender polish. It was all there. Bank statements going back 15 years, copies of cashier's checks, transfer receipts. I ran my fingers over the faded ink of notes that once seemed so normal. "Thanks, Dad. Couldn't have done this without you." Not realizing I'd one day need them as ammunition. I found the down payment transfer for their house. $42,000 straight from my savings. The receipts for the new appliances when theirs suddenly stopped working. The credit card statements showing the plane tickets I bought so they could take that Hawaii trip. The one they bragged about to everyone, but never mentioned who paid for it. In a separate pile, I gathered the smaller things. Grocery runs when they were tight on cash. Babysitting nights that saved them hundreds in childcare. Even the Christmas presents for my grandkids that came from Santa, paid for by me, wrapped with my hands. I didn't stop there. I pulled photos from dusty albums and printed images off social media. Every birthday party, vacation, and home renovation I'd quietly funded. Every smiling face in those pictures owed something to me, though you'd never know it from the way I'd been pushed to the sidelines. Each item went into a neatly labeled envelope: house, vacations, daily expenses, gifts. By the time I was done, I had a stack thick enough to silence a room. Looking at it all spread out on my table, I felt two things at once: heartbreak and resolve. Heartbreak because these were supposed to be happy memories. Resolve because now they'd have to face the truth in front of everyone they wanted to impress. They thought they'd replaced me with someone more important. But I was about to show them I was the reason they had a table to sit at in the first place. A week later, the invitation landed in my mailbox. At first glance, it looked like any other piece of glossy, over-designed stationery. Gold edges, embossed lettering, the works. But when I opened it, I realized it wasn't just another casual dinner. It was their big night. A combined birthday and anniversary celebration for my son and daughter-in-law. And it wasn't just family. The guest list, printed neatly on a separate insert, read like a who's who of their social circle. Neighbors, church friends, business contacts, and of course, her family. The polished, well-connected clan that had slowly replaced me in my own children's lives. I traced my finger over the words, formal attire requested, and couldn't help but smile. This was it, the perfect stage. The kind of event where appearances mattered more than anything, where reputations were polished and displayed like trophies. The kind of night where every compliment, every approving nod, was currency in their social world. And that's exactly why my truth would hit them hardest here. I imagined the scene. The tables perfectly set, wine glasses catching the soft glow of candles, laughter floating through the air. Then me, stepping in, not to blend in, but to hold up that mirror I'd been preparing. This wasn't about ruining a party. It was about reclaiming my place in the story, showing them, in front of the very people whose opinions they valued most, exactly who I was and exactly what they'd done.
I set the invitation down on my kitchen counter, right next to the neatly stacked envelopes of evidence I'd been compiling. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. There was no anger left, just the steady certainty of a man who knew he was walking toward justice. For years, they'd built their image on a foundation I quietly laid for them. On this night, in front of everyone, I'd pull away the tablecloth and let them watch what happens when the truth is served instead of the meal they planned. The week before the party, my kitchen table turned into something between a war room and an accountant's desk. I took every envelope I'd prepared, house, vacations, daily expenses, gifts, and spread them out neatly. Then, one by one, I opened each folder and began making copies. Not just for my son and daughter-in-law, but for every guest who mattered. I counted them carefully. Her parents, her sisters, my son's closest friends, the neighbors they were always bragging to, and every member of the daughter-in-law's extended family who thought they knew the truth about me. By the time I was done, there were 20 pristine evidence packets, each one bound with a simple black clip, the top page printed in bold. The real story behind the perfect family. No flashy colors, no dramatic fonts, just the facts. Dates, amounts, receipts, and photos that spoke louder than any speech I could give. Next came me. I wasn't going to show up looking like the cast-off they'd tried to make me. I drove to a tailor I hadn't visited since Maria was alive. He measured me for a deep charcoal suit, clean lines, perfect fit. I bought a crisp white shirt, a muted burgundy tie, and a pair of polished leather shoes. When I tried it on at home, I barely recognized the man in the mirror. 2 days before the event, I sat in the barber's chair for a fresh cut and a close shave. The gray in my hair caught the light, and for the first time in years I didn't look tired. I looked ready. That night I sat in my living room, the suit hanging pressed and ready, the evidence stacked in my briefcase. I closed my eyes and pictured walking into that hall, the hum of conversation dropping as people saw me, the moment when their eyes met the truth laid bare on paper. I wasn't coming to beg for my seat back. I was coming to remind them it was mine all along. This time I'd walk in like I belonged there, because I did. The night of the party, I parked half a block away. The muffled sound of music and laughter floated through the cool air as I stepped out of my car, adjusting my tie. My briefcase felt steady in my hand. Not heavy, not light, just right. The venue was a rented hall decorated to impress. Golden light spilled through tall windows, catching the shimmer of crystal glasses and polished silverware inside. I could see silhouettes moving, hear the low hum of conversation. It was a scene I used to be part of, without question. I pushed the door open and stepped in. The effect was immediate. The conversations didn't just fade, they stopped. A wave of silence swept across the room like a tide pulling back before a storm. Dozens of faces turned toward me, some in surprise, others in barely concealed disapproval. I smiled, warmly, as if I'd been invited. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady, carrying across the hall. "Beautiful night for a celebration." I moved slowly, deliberately, through the crowd, shaking hands, nodding politely, greeting people I hadn't seen in years. "John, how's the garden? Mrs. Carter, your grandson must be in high school by now." My voice was calm, my tone light, as if nothing at all was wrong. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my son. His smile froze halfway, his glass paused midair. Next to him, my daughter-in-law clutched her champagne flute a little too tightly. She leaned in to whisper something in his ear, her eyes darting toward me like I'd just tracked mud across her pristine floor. I didn't give them the satisfaction of hurrying over or demanding attention. Instead, I took my time, letting my presence settle into the room like a slow, deliberate drumbeat. Every step was measured, every handshake purposeful. By the time I reached the center of the hall, the silence had shifted, not gone, but charged. Questions hung in the air. Why was I here? Why did I look so sure of myself? I set my briefcase gently on a side table, unlatched it, and looked up at the sea of curious, cautious eyes. It was time. I clicked open the briefcase, the sound crisp in the stillness. All eyes followed as I pulled out the first neat stack of envelopes. "I brought something for you," I said calmly, my voice carrying without strain. "A little history lesson, from my perspective." I walked to the first table and set an envelope in front of my daughter-in-law's father. "This is what it looked like when I helped your daughter and my son buy their first home." I moved to the next guest, her mother, and laid one down. "This is the college fund I covered for the grandkids you adore posting about." One by one, I circled the room, placing each packet in front of them. Inside, copies of bank transfers, receipts, photographs, and notes. Proof of every dollar, every sacrifice, every late-night phone call answered in their time of need. When I reached my son, I paused. "Yours is thicker," I said softly. "It covers not just the money, but the years." His hand twitched when he took it, eyes darting to the floor. "I gave," I continued, turning to face the room, "because that's what family does. At least, that's what I thought." I let the silence stretch. And in return, I was slowly replaced, pushed to the edge, my seat taken, my name erased. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Some flipped through the documents immediately, their brows knitting. Others looked at me, then at my son, with the slow dawning of something between confusion and disappointment. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough on its own. "I'm not here to start a fight," I said, letting my gaze sweep the room. "I'm here so no one leaves tonight believing a story that isn't true. So you all understand the cost of that chair. The one that wasn't mine anymore." The whispers swelled, sharp and quick, bouncing from table to table. I stepped back, letting the weight of the evidence settle where it needed to. The room was no longer warm with celebration. It was tight, brittle, and heavy, exactly as I'd planned. I turned, finally, to face the two people I had avoided looking at all evening, my son and his wife. "You know," I began, my voice level but cutting through the low hum of whispers, "the hardest part isn't seeing my seat filled by someone else. It's hearing what you've been saying when you thought I'd never hear it." My daughter-in-law's lips tightened, but I went on, pulling a folded sheet from my pocket. "Let's start with this text. Sent from you to your mother. Daniel means well, but he's just not the kind of image we want for the family." I looked up. An image. I guess 20 years of supporting you doesn't photograph well enough. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My son shifted in his chair, eyes locked on the tablecloth. And this one? I continued, holding up another printed screenshot. When you were planning last Christmas. If we don't invite him, maybe he'll finally get the hint. We can't keep letting him think he's part of our traditions. I let the words hang there. Several heads turned sharply toward them. My son finally looked up, his jaw tight. Dad, you're twisting. No, I said firmly, stepping closer. I'm quoting. I pulled another envelope from the stack and handed it to the nearest guest. You all can read for yourselves, the dates, the names, the words. The air in the room shifted. Curiosity was gone, replaced by a slow, gathering judgment, the kind that sticks. You invited me to help raise your kids, I said, my voice softening, to fix your roof, to cover your bills when you couldn't, and in return, you erased me, first from the photos, then from the table, then from the story you told about your life.
My daughter-in-law started to speak, but someone from her own family interrupted, their voice cold. Is this true? She hesitated. Too long. That was all it took. I stepped back, letting the silence do its work. My pulse was steady. The truth was no longer mine to defend. It was theirs to live with. Her father, a tall man with the air of someone used to being listened to, cleared his throat and stood. All right, everyone, he began with a forced chuckle. I think we're all overreacting. Families have disagreements. We don't need to... I cut in before he could build momentum. You mean like the time you told my son that accepting help from me would make him look weak? Or when you advised them to set boundaries? By which you meant cutting me out of their lives. The room went quiet again. All eyes swung back to him. That's not... He started. I reached into the folder and slid a printed email across the table to the nearest guest. Read it aloud, please.
The guest hesitated, then began. Daniel's involvement is starting to get in the way of Michael and Isabella's independence. Best to keep him on the sidelines. A sharp inhale came from somewhere near the back of the room. The father's confident posture faltered. That was taken out of context. Context? I asked, tilting my head. You mean the years I spent paying for the roof over your daughter's head? Or the fact that every sideline you pushed me to was bought with my money? Now the questions weren't coming from me. They were coming from the guests. Is that true? Someone asked. Did he really pay for your house? Another pressed. Why would you do that to your own family? A voice cut in from across the room. Their defenses cracked in real time. The daughter-in-law's father tried to answer one question, then another, but each response only drew more skepticism. Her mother kept whispering in her ear, but Isabella's face was pale and tight. The air was no longer celebratory. The same table they had once proudly filled was now heavy with judgment, the chairs around it shifting uncomfortably. The polite smiles were gone. In their place was the unmistakable look of people reassessing who they were sitting next to. The table they'd stolen from me was now collapsing under them, and I didn't lift a finger. I didn't wait for the shouting to start, though I knew it would. I gathered the last empty envelope from the table, placed it neatly back in my briefcase, and fastened the latch with a quiet click. Without a single raised voice or slammed door, I turned toward the exit. My shoes made soft, steady taps on the hardwood, each step carrying me further from the scene I'd set in motion. Behind me, voices began to rise. At first, it was a low rumble, then sharper tones cut through the air. My son's voice, strained and defensive. My daughter-in-law's, trembling but sharp-edged. Questions fired from guests, overlapping, insistent. The unmistakable sound of a carefully crafted image, falling apart in real time. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see it. The sound was enough. As I reached the door, I paused for the briefest moment, letting the cool night air brush against my face. Outside, it was calm. No judgmental stares, no whispered accusations, no tight smiles hiding contempt. Just the open street, the quiet hum of distant traffic, and the faint smell of rain in the air. I stepped out, closing the door behind me with the gentleness of someone who'd already said everything that needed to be said. My car was parked under a street lamp. I walked to it slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to savor the stillness, the contrast between the chaos inside and the peace I carried with me now. As I slid into the driver's seat, the muffled sounds from the house faded into nothing. I started the engine, glanced once in the rearview mirror, not at them, but at myself. The man looking back at me wasn't erased, invisible, or sidelined anymore. Sometimes the loudest revenge is silence, and that night my silence spoke louder than anything I could have shouted. I drove away without a single regret. The first call came the next morning. My son's name lit up the screen, but I let it ring. No voicemail. An hour later, the phone buzzed again, this time my daughter-in-law. I didn't answer that one either. I wasn't ready to hear excuses dressed up as apologies. By noon, the texts started. "We need to talk." Then another. "You didn't have to embarrass us like that," followed by the one that made me set my phone face down on the counter. "You've ruined everything." 3 days passed, and the messages shifted from defensive to desperate. "Dad, please, just call me. We can explain. This has gotten out of hand." They showed up at my door once, unannounced. I didn't open it. Through the blinds, I watched them standing there on my porch, my son looking at the ground, his wife clutching her coat tightly around her. After a minute, they walked away. Friends in town started reaching out. One called to say he'd overheard people at the grocery store talking about that scene at the party. Another told me my daughter-in-law's parents had canceled an upcoming charity dinner, claiming they were taking a break from social events. Apparently, some of the guests had been more than willing to share what they'd seen, and the story was spreading faster than they could control it. Their carefully curated reputation had taken a hit, and there was no PR spin strong enough to hide the truth now. And me? I felt lighter. Not happy. Not yet. But lighter. I realized something important in those quiet days. I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. I had simply handed back the weight they'd been making me carry for years. The phone kept buzzing. I kept ignoring it. My silence was my answer. And they were finally hearing it. It didn't happen overnight. At first, they tried to keep up appearances. The fancy cars still sat in the driveway. The social media posts still painted their life in bright, polished colors. But cracks have a way of spreading. Without my monthly help, the mortgage payment came first. And even that started slipping. A friend from the bank mentioned, in a hushed tone, that 2 payments had been missed. The summer trip to Italy? Canceled. The annual ski getaway with the in-laws? Quietly postponed. And when the back deck renovation stopped halfway through, wood planks left to warp under the sun, even the neighbors began to whisper. I'd see them sometimes at the grocery store, pushing a half-empty cart. No more bottles of imported wine, no overflowing baskets of organic produce, just the basics. My daughter-in-law kept her head down. My son forced a tight smile that never reached his eyes. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Life was doing the talking for me. I poured my time and money back into my own home. The roof finally got repaired. The garden bloomed like it hadn't in years. I replaced the worn couch in the living room and hung new curtains that caught the afternoon sun just right. Weekends that used to be swallowed by "Dad, can you help with?" were now mine. I joined a woodworking group, started cooking new recipes instead of just reheating leftovers. Even found myself laughing more. real, unguarded laughter that didn't carry the weight of resentment. I realized something. The seat at the family table I'd lost wasn't just physical. It was a role they'd taken for granted, a place they thought they could erase without consequence. But while they were struggling to keep their image together, I was quietly building a life that didn't need their approval. And every time I walked into my home, warm, paid for, and truly mine, I knew I'd traded that seat for something far more valuable: my freedom. People think revenge is about anger, that it's about winning, about making someone hurt the way they hurt you. But I've learned the deepest revenge isn't loud. It's not about shouting across a table or throwing back every insult you've been fed. It's about taking back what they took from you and doing it with such quiet certainty that they can't mistake it for spite. They have to see it for what it is, the natural consequence of forgetting who you are. I didn't take away their table out of hate. I took it because they forgot who built it. For years I hosted those dinners, kept those traditions alive, and poured my own money into making sure there was always something to celebrate. I built that sense of home, brick by brick, meal by meal, sacrifice by sacrifice, and in return I was erased. One joke, one accidental omission, one empty chair at a time. Until the night I walked in and realized my chair was gone entirely. Respect is earned, not owed, and they stopped earning it long before I stopped giving it. So I left them with the one thing they thought they'd never lose: my place, my support, my willingness to carry the weight. And I took back the most important thing I'd forgotten was mine to keep: my dignity. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. Even now, I wish things had been different. I wish my children had remembered the man who raised them, instead of trying to replace him. But if there's one thing this has taught me, it's that family isn't just blood. It's the people who respect the seat you've earned at their table, and who would never dream of taking it away. If you've ever been pushed aside, if you've ever been made to feel like a stranger in your own family, know this: you are worth more than their approval. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away and let them feel the empty space you leave behind. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to hear more real stories of fathers taking back their place, subscribe to Wise Revenge, because some seats are worth fighting for.